Welcome everyone to Commercial Real Estate 101. Today we're talking about entitlements, planning, and zoning. And I am super stoked, super stoked. Earlier this month, I was on a Zoom, not as a host, but as just one of the audience people. When it was all about planning and entitlements and stuff. But Adan Madrid was the guest, and he was talking all about entitlements, planning, and zoning, and he did a great job. And I sent him a note while he was speaking saying, "Look, I really enjoyed this. Would you mind doing a Zoom for me for all of my friends? Because I have not heard a good live training class on entitlements, planning, or zoning ever. Okay. Until the first one I saw with Don speaking. We got on the phone, we talked about it. He's like, okay, let's do it. And so here he is, the man of the hour, Adan Madrid. And so tell us, introduce yourself. What should we know about you as what's your background in planning? I mean, did you work for a city or what? Just give us a little thumbnail.
Thank you, everybody, for joining the Zoom call today. We understand that everyone's time is valuable, and we have, I think, an hour slotted for this. So I appreciate your time and hope that you guys find this to be very fruitful for you. As Chris mentioned, my name is Adan Madrid, and I was a city planner back in the early 90s. And at that time, I had aspirations to grow up and become a planning director, and then eventually a city manager, and to remain in the public sector. And God had different plans for me. So right around 1996, I had an opportunity to jump on the other side of the counter, and I joined a land use planning consulting firm and have been in the private sector ever since. So I am a land use planner by education and profession. That is my area of expertise. I live and breathe in that environment. I've attended hundreds of planning commission hearings and hundreds of city council hearings, have spoken before LA City Council, the Board of Supervisors, etc. Have been doing this for about 25, maybe more, like 28 years now, representing developers and private owners with their development projects.
In our private conversations, you've told me some really interesting stories.
Mhm.
And one of the things I really want to kind of focus in on here today is helping agents, because primarily I think the people who are joining us today are real estate agents working on commercial real estate projects, maybe some residential, because you do residential and commercial stuff, right?
Yes, yeah, residential and commercial.
Okay.
Yeah, residential is really big right now, with the sort of housing that we have in California. It's a hot topic.
Oh, so you get involved in a lot of things like with ADUs and stuff, I bet, don't you?
Not necessarily ADUs. You know, those are smaller projects, and usually those are the proponents for those projects might be homeowners that want to add an ADU to their property, and the path for permitting ADUs is wide open. They made it very easy, so they really don't need a guy like me to represent them. But there are developers out there that are looking to develop multi-housing, mixed use developments, those sorts of things, and those do require land use entitlements, and I'll get involved with that.
Okay, cool. One of the things that has been in the news a lot is repurposing um,
Mhm.
office buildings into housing. Have you been involved in any of those projects?
Not personally, but I'm aware of what you're talking about. There are a lot of buildings out there that are being repurposed for housing or other types of uses. It's very common in Santa Monica, pretty common in Santa Ana in some parts, Long Beach, LA City in particular. They're doing a lot of that.
Okay, cool. Hey, everyone, if you would just do me a favor real quick, and type in the chat why you're here today. I mean, are you here as a real estate agent? Are you here as a investor or what? Because we did put this out on LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff. So who knows who can be in the audience? But I know a lot of the names that showed up are real estate agents. So just tell us real quick, what's your capacity? What are you doing? And participation is really important because if you guys participate, then we are going to look about doing more of these classes and maybe doing a follow-up with Adan. Really appreciate you guys participating here. And so I'm seeing so far pretty much everyone is a real estate agent. We had one person who's an investor. Some people are multi-state. People are coming from all over the nation. So that's really cool. I did notice we actually had international sign up when we were registering for this event here today. So that's kind of cool. Just give us a little bit of a background real quick. Why is why are entitlements planning and zoning important to a real estate agent?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to you guys because you have to deal with that. It's pretty common for me to hear from brokers and retailers and developers how difficult it is to get through the entitlement process. And it's usually spoken in the sense of the city being this mysterious entity that they have to deal with and navigate, and it's not something that they're accustomed to doing. So entitlements are important because if you can't get your project entitled, then you have no project. Probably a good place to start is having an understanding of the overall framework, and that might be fundamental for some on the call. Maybe for others, it's something that would be valuable to understand. So I'm going to start there, and if it's too fundamental, then let me know, and then we can go on to a different topic. When it comes to entitlements, there's so many things that we can talk about. We can talk about the law and California law and how that affects how cities are supposed to operate. There are general law cities and charter cities, and things that you can do as a developer to protect your interest or that of your client. We can go there, and that's one rabbit hole in and of itself. But
Well, let's
maybe I
focus
won't
in on
start
kind of some
there.
practical stuff, okay, real quick.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here I'm working on some development projects, okay? And so one of them is in Manteca, California. You ever heard of Manteca, California, everyone?
Yes.
So if
Oh,
you've
yeah.
heard of Manteca, just put a Y in the chat. I want to know if you've heard of Manteca. It's in the Central Valley, kind of near Stockton, California, south of Sacramento. And so with this particular project, it's a lot in the city, and the client is wanting to build out like a mini warehouse thing for their business. They have a company that they install fire equipment into development projects. And so they need a warehouse, they want to do some training there, and then they have a small office core. We went to the city, and the city is like, well, this is zoned neighborhood commercial. And when you look through the list of things that are in there for neighborhood commercial, this particular thing just doesn't quite match. But when an agent is like trying to help their client, what are the kind of questions? I mean, if you're an agent, you've never been into the city planner's office, how do you how do you suggest someone like me come in and introduce themselves and get on the good side of the whoever's at the desk or answering the phone as maybe an assistant planner or something to be able to get the information I need?
Yeah, that's a good question and a very common scenario. I think everyone's going to go about that differently. I will share with you how I would go about it, how I go about it. I like to ask questions that I know the answers to for the purpose of obtaining confirmation of my understanding of the code. So I think a good place to start with your property is to understand what the zoning designation is, and that information is available on most city web pages, lead agency web pages, counties, whoever has jurisdiction over that area. the zoning map's going to be available there. You can look up your property. In some cases, via a GIS system, you can type in the address and it'll take you right to what the zone designation is. That's step one. Step two would be to Google, let's say, City of Manteca's municipal code, and it should be online. And then you could download the corresponding sections of the code that pertain to your zone designation, and then start perusing the list of permitted uses, those uses that could be conditionally permitted. If I don't see the use that I'm proposing or wanting to develop on that property, I might look at the adjacent zoning, not adjacent via physically, geographically, but if we're looking at a C2 zone, I would look at maybe the C3 zone and see what the C3 zone allows.
For the uninitiated, when you're saying a
Mhm.
C2, C3, you're saying C probably stands for commercial, right?
Yeah, commercial, there's different degrees. So for example, if you're dealing with residential, you'll have R1s, but a lot of cities will have that kind of naming convention for zoning. R1 stands for single family residential, then you'll have R2, multifamily low density, R3. So as you go up in the numbers, the intensity of use goes up for both residential and commercial. So C2 is generally general commercial, C1's neighborhood commercial, C3 may be heavy commercial. So let's say you're in the C2 zone and the use isn't listed, but it might be listed in the C3 zone. That might be a good thing. You can argue plaintively that the use that you're proposing, although it's not listed in that particular zone, just by the nature of the operation may not be different than a use that is listed as a permitted use or a conditionally permitted use. It's not uncommon for codes to inadvertently exclude certain uses because those uses maybe were not they were not common at the time that the code was written, or the authors of the code weren't, they didn't have the wherewithal to list everything. Just because a use is not listed in the code doesn't mean it shouldn't be allowed. I think there's room to make the argument that if it meets the spirit and intent of what that zone designation is for, and that use is not going to represent or create any negative impacts to the other uses that are allowed in that zone, there should be some room, some consideration given to allowing that use to move forward. You can also suggest to the city that if they don't feel comfortable allowing that particular use outright, by right, that perhaps maybe having that project go through a conditional use permit where it can be fully vetted and the planning commission can attach conditions of approval at the recommendation of staff to mitigate any concerns that they might have. That's also a pretty good mechanism, a path to take on a project like that. If you have a use that's not listed, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not allowed. I would look for avenues where you can draw a parallel between that use and other uses that are allowed.
Okay, so going back to the agent who maybe is new at this game, when they go into the planning department, how do you suggest that they approach whoever the planner is or whoever answers the phone that first time?
Yeah, okay. So you walk into City Hall, you're armed with your clipboard, you know the address, you have an idea of what you want to build, you maybe have a list of questions. Depending on the city, you're not going to get the most seasoned planner at the counter. So beware of that. I'm not saying that that's not a good place to start, but don't stop there. So you can get some initial information from the professional behind the counter, but just know that they may be junior. So if I take that approach, I'll ask them questions, get my questions answered, be grateful for their time and the information they provide, ask them for their business card and take a look at it, see what it says. It may say assistant planner, or it might say associate planner, or maybe, maybe the way the city functions and the way they're staffed, they do have senior planners at the counter. And if you get one of those cards, then you could rest more assured that the information that they gave you is accurate. Now, keep this in mind. Cities are indemnified from mistakes. So if they tell you, yeah, you could do this, and yeah, it's permitted, and we can get you through the planning commission in 4 to 5 months. it's been my experience that those conversations are always overly optimistic at the counter. And in reality, it takes twice as long. And it's not necessarily because of the city, it's because in the course of designing your project, you have to work through issues, design issues, and there's a lot of things you need to design into your project. And the tighter the fit is, the more difficult that's going to be. You know, you're dealing with landscape setbacks, building setbacks, minimum drive aisle widths. If it's a drive-through restaurant, you're dealing with stacking and queuing, and all of that needs to work together. So if the design team receives comments from the city and it becomes a game of Tetris because the property's too tight, therein lies the delay, because now your entire design team is trying to figure out how to make everything fit and to placate all the departments and to respond to all the comments in a way that will be acceptable. When you walk into the city, you get information. Don't stop there. Again, I really, really suggest that you read the code for yourself, especially for development, because there's so much on the line. There's so much money that goes into the soft costs to get to a hearing. You don't want to initiate that project based on what somebody told you at the counter. It's not that difficult to download the code and to take what they told you and further vet it by your own review of the code. It's so important.
Okay, let me just make a quick note for everyone. As a real estate agent in California, which is where I'm at, my broker has said, hey, look, Chris, you should not be doing a lot of work on the front end for your client. It's your client's responsibility to do that. Keeping that in mind, I will go in and I'll talk to people and I'll ask them to email me so I know who I talked to. And then I forward that to the client with a note that says, hey, look, I did a little bit of preliminary research for you, but this research is not something that you should rely on. You need to do your own research and you need to connect directly with the city officials and make sure that you're comfortable with what they're saying is accurate and that you can move forward with this based on your own interactions with staff. So do you have anything to add to that?
I would like to add that it's very common for here in Southern California, where I reside, for brokers that know me to give me a call and say, "Hey, Adan, you know, this is at the early stages of a conversation that I'm having with a potential tenant or retailer that's interested in this property. Can you let me know today if what we're discussing is feasible from a zoning perspective?" And I'll do what I'll call a quick toe dip. I'll look at the code quickly, and oftentimes it's a city that I'm familiar with already. So I may be able to answer that in that same conversation, that same telephone discussion, or I'll get back to them in 30 minutes or that afternoon. And in many cases, I may know the city manager or know the planning director, and I'll pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I'm looking at this property. I have a client's looking at this property. Here's what they'd like to do. I've looked at the code. This is what the code says. I believe that we have a path forward here, but I wanted to get your feedback on this. Is this a project that staff can get behind? Is this something that you think your planning commission will support, your city council?" And in most cases, I can get a pretty solid answer rather quickly. So I would encourage you to find someone like that in your market. If it's Southern California, I'd hope it would be me. Feel free to give me a call, and I'm happy to do that for you. And I do that at no cost. And the hope for me is that I would be able to represent the project when it goes through the full entitlements. But if you're not in this market and you're somewhere else, look for a legitimate land use planning consultant. There are a lot of planning directors, city managers that have retired that are now consultants in the private sector. And that's who you want to team up with, is somebody of that caliber that can help you navigate the city process.
Okay, cool. So why don't you go ahead and take a second and put into the chat your contact information so people know how to connect with you. And while you're doing that, I'm just going
Okay.
to introduce myself. Do you guys all see the screen with my information? Just so you know a little bit about me, my name is Chris Vogt. I'm the managing director of the Vogt Real Estate Group, brokered by eXp Realty. And we are forming a nationwide team of residential agents and commercial agents, residential agents who want to get into commercial, which we call residential. And so if you're interested in collaborating and being involved in commercial real estate with me, I'd love you to connect with me. My contact information is there at the bottom of the card. All right. So thank you for letting me take a moment to introduce myself. As we were talking and preparing for this today, you were talking about a checklist that you use. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and share my screen and show the checklist. It's in Word format, so it's something that you can fill out. It's this thing. This thing's like 11 pages long or something, and it's just got a lot of information. And one of the things that I look at when I'm looking at a checklist is, okay, checklist is cool. How do I fill this thing out? What's the information? And am I even qualified to fill this thing out? I asked Adan to send me a sample looking at what one would actually look at. And so what he did is he went through and he changed the names and the addresses and stuff so that it would be protect the innocent, protect the guilty. And so, oh, I shared the wrong thing again. Sorry. And so what I want to do is I want to go through and talk through what is in one of these forms and what's the purpose of the form. Is that it, Don? Don, do you see it?
Yeah, that's the one that's filled out with the addresses changed out for fictitious addresses and cities, city information changed out for fictitious city names. But this is good to look at because if all you have is the forms, like, okay, here's the form, there's the information is not there, so you really don't get the benefit of understanding how to go about thinking about those fields and filling out the information. So Chris and I decided, okay, but this maybe it's a good idea to just go through one that's already filled out. Chris, if you'd like to scroll down, so you have basic information at the top, project address,
So
jurisdiction,
did I
etc.
scroll too far or?
No, this is fine. Yeah, we can talk about existing conditions. So, but before I go through this, let me provide some context. So these are reports that retailers will ask me to prepare. So this might be for Raising Cane's, or it might be for Starbucks or Pollo Campero, Quick Quack Car Wash. When you're talking with those real estate professionals that represent those companies, and they're looking at a property that you have available, they'll ask someone like me to prepare a comprehensive site information report. And this is all that goes into it. So I'll start with just providing a narrative on the existing conditions of the property. And on the surface, that sounds rather straightforward. But what it does is it forces me, it forces everyone to really observe what's there. How much linear street frontage do we have? What are the points of ingress and egress? Those are the drive entrances. Is there an existing development on the property? Is it electrified? Are there existing tenants? Is a transformer still there? If the transformer is missing, that's a big deal here in Southern California, especially if you're within the LADWP area. So existing conditions are important because it's the foundation for us to understand what is it that we're really looking at here. What's the condition of the property, and then proposed improvements. This is there so that we are all of the understanding of what's being proposed. It's kind of like a preamble to a contract. Whereas the client is proposing to build this, whereas they want to drive through, etc. And then we get down to the zoning information. See here that the zoning information section is a lot more comprehensive than, hey, it's in the C2 zone. Check, that box is checked, let's move on. In a lot of cases, that's not enough. We really need to understand what the entirety of the zone designation represents and what the code has to say about that. In this particular case, it's in the C2-1 CUGU zone, and it's also within the Blue Sky Community Plan. So I'm gonna talk about that real quick here.
So some people are raising their hands, which is very cool. We love
Oh yeah.
participation.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is if you have a question, put it in the chat and we'll see if we can address it while we're going. We don't want to be too disruptive, but we've had really good response to this meeting. some people are also asking for the document. I want to make sure that everyone who is in the meeting actually registered for the meeting, because after the meeting, we're going to be sending out the checklist and also this sample. We're sending both of them out, right, Adon? Both the
Yeah, that's
checklist?
fine. Yeah, we can send
Okay.
both documents out so they have a clean template to work with and they
And an
have something
example.
that they can, yeah, the sample.
Yeah, and so if you have not registered for the meeting, I just put the link in the chat. So please go click on the link. And if you're watching on streaming afterwards and recording, I will put it in the comments so that you guys, or in the description of the video, so that you guys can register and get that if you're joining us after the fact. So make sure you register. And if you have questions while we're going here, put them in the comments so that we can address those either in this meeting or in a future meeting. All right, go ahead, Adon.
Okay, so what I wanted to share with the group is that the greatest pitfall in a development project is moving forward and not having done your full due diligence. Even especially at this stage, we don't know what we don't know. If we didn't turn over every leaf and every stone to make sure we have a full understanding of all of the applicable, and that's the key word, the applicable sections of the municipal code, we may read maybe a portion of what we should have read and arrive at an understanding that is incorrect. And then we make commitments and we move down the road and drawings are prepared. And when we get the first round comments from the city, we realize that, oh, wait a second, not only is this property in the C2 zone, but it's also within an overlay zone, and the overlay zone may not allow the use that we're proposing. Or it may, create a wrinkle in the development project, and hopefully it's the latter. Hopefully it's just a wrinkle that's not unsurmountable. The takeaway on that is to make sure that you've looked at every aspect of the code, you've asked all the hard questions, and you have a good understanding of what you can or cannot do. Because it's the things that weren't discussed that will come back and derail a project or create issues. So how do you do that? If you feel comfortable reading the code and you have familiarity with the city, that's the ideal situation. But if you don't, at minimum, try to get the audience of a senior planner. And here's how you might be able to do that. So you go to the front counter and you're going to get who you get at the counter. And that's okay for starters. And let's say you get an assistant planner and they give you some information. You could thank them and say, let's say his name's Bob. Bob, I really appreciate the time that you've given me today at the counter. I've taken some copious notes here. I think I have a pretty good idea of what you guys require and what might be feasible here. This project, if we move forward with it, represents a significant investment for the developers and the stakeholders involved. And I have a responsibility to them to help them make sure that we've discussed everything that needs to be discussed before they commit to going down this path. Would you be so kind as to facilitate a meeting with the planning director? I would really appreciate that. And I would really appreciate if you attend as well, since we've already had this conversation. And usually that's a way to get you another meeting to discuss your project beyond that counter discussion with the assistant planner or the associate planner, whoever it is that you might be dealing with.
So when you're talking to people, I'm assuming that, when people come to me and they ask me questions about commercial real estate, a lot of times they're just totally unprepared and they haven't done any research. And so if they come to me and they're demonstrating that they've done some research, that's always helpful. And when I'm looking at this document, I mean, number one, I know that you're preparing this for your client, but are you also sharing this information and this document with the planning staff at the city so that they know that you've done your homework and that you've got a really solid understanding of the project and how it relates to the city?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Not this document per se, but let's jump forward to the application. So let's say
Yeah.
hypothetically that we do the due diligence and everything looks good. And we have a go, no go discussion with all the stakeholders. The lease is signed, deals are made, and we're moving forward. Now it's time to prepare the drawings for the entitlement. and the application's being prepared for a conditional use permit or whatever entitlement that the project requires. It is within that application package that it behooves whoever's doing this to make that application narrative, that, to submit a project description and to submit applicant suggested findings for approval. All entitlements have required findings. A CUP, a conditional use permit, has a list of required findings. And although they may differ from city to city, they're generally the same because they're cascaded down from the state of California. And I would presume that if you're in a different state, the structure's probably similar. Um, but you want to write a comprehensive project description, letting staff know what's being proposed, and you're making this request pursuant to this section of the code, pursuant to the provisions of this chapter, et cetera, et cetera. And what that does is it lets staff know right away that they're dealing with an applicant who's schooled in this arena, and they're more likely to give you a fair shake as they're taking you through the process. And secondly, when they see that you've given them findings, you're shaping their opinion about the project from day one. When they first sit down, they've been assigned your case, they open up the folder, and everything's in there, and they're going to pull out that project description. And within the project description, there are comprehensive findings. And it's not uncommon for them to take your findings verbatim and slip sheet those findings directly, or commandeer your findings and put them straight into the staff report. So at that early stage, you're shaping their thought process on how they see your project. Now, I have to say that I've seen project descriptions submitted by others, and they don't take the time to do that, and they may submit one page or a third of a page or two-thirds of a page, a couple of paragraphs. And some of these projects are large developments. You have an anchor tenant and a shopping center. And even with a project of that caliber, that magnitude, to my surprise, oftentimes what's inserted into the application is very minimal. I would say a good narrative, a good project description coupled with findings should be at least 10 pages if you
Okay.
want to achieve that objective in directing staff in a more positive way, a more controlled way.
So I'm assuming that most people don't really have the time or inclination to do this for themselves, so they would want to hire someone like you. When you're looking at a project, here we are in January of 2024. So, because this could live on YouTube for years to come. So, just so that people have perspective. So, in January of 2024, what size of a project, dollar wise, would it be worth someone's investment? Maybe even while they're in escrow, doing the due diligence and trying to figure out if the city's going to be favorable to the project that they want to do before they buy it. How big of a
Yeah.
project do you think it is before it's worth, hiring you as a consultant? And I know that your fees are going to start at a minimum, they're going to go up based on the size of the project.
Yeah, that's a good question. The fees are going to be commensurate with the amount of work required to represent the interest of the developer, the interest of the property owner. I'm currently involved with a person who has a 46,000 square foot residential lot, and they want to subdivide it. And their initial thought was, well, geez, let's subdivide that into 5 or 6 parcels. And they can technically do that. But if you subdivide into more than, I believe it's 4, it triggers a tract map, a tentative tract map versus a tentative parcel map. And a parcel map is categorically exempt from environmental review, whereas a tract map has to do an initial study, and the initial studies are like $75,000.
Well,
So for that particular client, the amount of work that I have to do to get them across the finish line is less than if I were, per se, representing a developer on a mixed-use development. That requires a lot more involvement, a lot more lifting for them. So it really depends. I mean, there are clients that I work for, and the fees are minimal because the scope of work for what they're trying to do is minimal. So I guess to answer your question, it really depends on the project, and it's commensurate with the amount of work involved with representing the interest.
Okay. But in general terms, if someone's buying, say, a $500,000 piece of property, is it worth having a consultation with
Yeah,
you?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think in all cases, especially when you're dealing with commercial developments, it's worth whether you're reaching out to a guy like me or reaching out to somebody else who is a former city planner or really understands how cities operate and understand state law. That's another thing we haven't really talked about. Cities do not have the unfettered ability to do whatever they want. They are bound by state law, so they too have to be above reproach, and they too have to make the proper findings for denial or approval. Just can't just deny your project just because they don't like it. So city planners, city consultants, they understand that. I understand that. They also cannot attach conditions to your project that are not fair. And there are court cases that are applicable across the United States, not just specific to California. And we're not going to talk about that right now, but just write this down. Write down Nexus test, and underneath that, write down Nolan and Dolan. Those are the two cases. And those two cases set the framework by which a city can legitimately add a condition of approval. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a project and the city goes, we want we want you to install a new traffic signal with left turn permissive. And there's already a left turn pocket and there's already a traffic signal there. Is that fair to your developer? Is that fair to your project? It may or may not be. It depends. So the Nolan and Dolan cases, they set the framework by which you can have those discussions. And I've had those discussions with the cities before, and it's not just about getting your project approved, but it's about also navigating around conditions that are going to cost you a lot of money and getting those conditions stricken from the conditions of approval on your resolution for approval. So that's important too. You shouldn't have to pay for things that are not reasonable and shouldn't be attached to your project. And there's a way to navigate all that. So when you pay for a consultant, not only are they helping you get your project approved, but they're also or should be able to identify when the city's trying to attach conditions that are not fair, and they should have the ability to negotiate those conditions and negotiate out of those conditions so you don't have to pay for that.
Okay, so this is a lot of great information. I'm really appreciating this. I'd like to just take a pause for just a second. And for those of you who are joining us live, we appreciate that. And for those of you who are joining us on a recording, if you would just take a moment, please, to like the video. If you have any comments of what you're gaining from the video, we, of course, would appreciate hearing from you of what you are gaining, what's your main takeaways in the comments. So share those. If you have questions that you'd like us to cover in future videos, please comment on that. And please subscribe to our channel. Why don't we go ahead and continue the discussion here? I'm
Sure.
really
Okay.
impressed with all the information you're putting in here. And I'm impressed with the fact too that you're putting footnotes in there so that it's easy for whoever is reviewing this document to see exactly what it is that you're going for. Are we ready to keep moving down the document or?
Yes, let me just touch on the footnotes real
Yeah.
quick here.
Okay.
So it's so important to footnote if you make a statement in a report like this, or you draw a conclusion that you're in the C2 zone and public storage facilities are allowed in the C2 zone by right. Okay, that's wonderful, but where in the code does it say that? And that's going to be important later because you may have to, defend yourself in making that representation to whoever you made that representation to. It might be a client. You might be on the phone and say, "Oh yeah, Yeah, this is allowed by right. And they may ask you, I don't need a CUP. You're like, nope, you don't need that. This is by right. Okay, wonderful. And they decide to move forward. And unless you've documented and you've seen for yourself where in the code it says that, you may find yourself in trouble later on. And you can get that from your conversation with the planner at the counter. They may represent to you that yes, what you're wanting to do is allowed. Okay, great. Would you provide me the section of the code where it says that? And they always will. They'll provide that to you, and in some cases they may even print it out and give you hard copies. So the footnotes are a part of that, right? It documents and substantiates the content of the information that's being provided, whether it's in a conversation or it's citing a code section.
Cool. All right. So, hey, everyone that is live with us, please comment. Are you enjoying this? I mean, I'm seeing the numbers of participants from when we started to now, and only two people have left the meeting. So I'm pretty sure you guys are liking this, but let us know what you're liking and what questions you have so we know for the future and as we move forward. All right. So back to you, Dom.
So in this particular case, this is all still zoning. This is all information about the zoning of this particular project. And it turned out in this particular case at this point in time that there was a pending, looming, vast amendment to the zoning code that would have derailed this project in its entirety. Under the current zoning, the use was allowed by right, but with this pending zone change or zone code amendment, it would not be allowed. The thing is, in most cities, I almost want to say all cities, when this scenario surfaces, you can vest your project by submitting your application. If it does require an entitlement, you submit your application, and in most cases, you will be grandfathered in, even though it's not approved. But just by sheer virtue of submitting your application, you're vested and you're not subject to the future adoption of a different zone regulation that may derail your project. In this particular case, we didn't need entitlements, so we submitted straight into the building plan check process. And by doing so, our client became vested. And sure enough, a few months later, the city council adopted the new zoning ordinance that affected this property and affected this project. But we were okay because we were vested. So
So to be vested, is it simply submitting your application, or is it you have to be a certain distance down that path?
it varies, and it's at the bequest of the city council. It really depends on how they adopt the new ordinance and its applicability. They can write it in. They can say, okay, under the applicability, the new ordinance shall be applicable to all new projects that have yet to be submitted into building plan check and or um, city planning. Or, and hopefully not, because this would be horrible. They could say, these new regulations are applicable to all projects for which building permits have not been issued.
So
They
if
could do
you're,
one or the other. In
yeah,
most cases, most cities are I'd like to say they're generally business friendly. They understand that the wheels of development are are pushed by everyone on this call and the private sector. So they generally don't want to thwart the efforts of developers in such a way that they never want to come back,
yeah.
because development begets development. So what I've seen in past years is if applications are in process, the presumption is that a lot of money's been spent already in developing drawings, environmental reports. You got phase ones, phase twos, you got surveys, geotechnical reports. There's a lot of money that goes into soft costs to push a project through the permitting process. I think they understand that. So in most cases, you can get fully vetted by just submitting your application.
Cool. Now, we've only got about 10 minutes left, and we've
Oh,
just,
wow.
we're on like page 2 or page 3 of this document. And
Yeah.
so we kind of expected that we weren't going to get all the way through this. So Don and I actually set up another date coming up February 9th for those of you who are live. For those of you who are watching this on recording, February 9th may already be past. So, but we want you to know that we are recording these sessions and we will make the recordings available to people who register. And I just sent the link in chat, and I'll put the chat in the comments for the recording too, of where to register to keep getting information on this series that we're doing on zoning, entitlements, and planning. And so click that link and register, please, and let us know you're interested so we can stay in touch with you and keep you abreast of future episodes as they come out. But we're definitely going to do at least one more part 2 on this where we're going to continue on this. So let's go ahead and keep going for another like 7 or 8 minutes, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Um, is there anybody out there with a specific question that they would like answered? Are you okay with that, Chris?
Yeah, I'd like him to put specific questions in there. And if we can get to one or two of them before we end, that'll be great. If not, we'll have them on our list for the
Okay.
next one. Okay. So while we're waiting to see if anyone has any specific questions, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about what's next?
We go. Okay. So for this particular client, they engage in the on-site sale of alcoholic beverages. You may or may not have a client that has that requirement for their use. But just below that, you'll see the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. For those of you that are conducting business in California, CEQA is a big deal, and you should be somewhat familiar with CEQA because it affects how projects are entitled. I mentioned earlier that a project can either be categorically exempt or it may require an initial study, and that conclusion of the initial study may be what's called a mitigated neg deck, or just a negative declaration. For the larger projects and the worst case scenario, the city may require a full environmental impact report, and you don't want to go down that path. You can Google California Environmental Quality Act, which is the acronym CEQA, and there are summaries of CEQA available online. And I would start by just perusing the category of uses that have been determined to be categorically exempt. These are uses that CEQA has already decided, we know these projects to have no impact on the environment. Therefore, there's no sense in reviewing them over and over again and putting applicants through the process and having them incur expenses to demonstrate that they don't have an environmental impact. And one such category that's very common is infill. So if you're in a metropolitan area and there's an existing development on a corner, maybe it's a strip mall, and you want to knock that down and build a fast food restaurant, the state has already predetermined that such an endeavor, such a project, is not going to have an environmental impact because there's already a use there. It's paved, and you're just replacing it with another one. That's just one example. There are many. We talked a little bit earlier about parcel maps and tract maps, how you can subdivide property and the decisions you can make that'll affect the CEQA determination that a jurisdiction will require. So I would just recommend that, if you're doing work in California, that you become familiar with CEQA. You don't have to become an expert, but just have some basic understanding of what it's all about and which projects are categorically exempt and which ones may require an initial study. Because if you do have a project that requires a full initial study, I mean, I've seen those studies cost $75,000, between $75,000 and $90,000. And if you could avoid that by making a slight change to your project, you're all the better for it.
Cool. Understanding state law is really important. I'm assuming that other states probably have some sort of an equivalent to what California does.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. And it goes back to police powers. Where do municipalities, cities get their police powers? Well, it starts at the state, It goes down to the counties, and then as cities incorporate, those police powers are cascaded down to them, and they self-govern. Most cities are general law cities, and by being general law cities, they are subject to the laws that come out of California, out of the Office of Planning and Research. So again, they don't have the unfettered ability to just do whatever they want. They're bound by certain standards and parameters. Now, charter cities, there are charter cities as well in California, and charter cities have a little more latitude on how they operate. That's a whole nother discussion, but just know that all municipalities and lead agencies, jurisdictions, they have parameters that they have to operate under.
Right.
So knowing that will help you navigate that arena, that entitlement process.
Well, we've got just a couple more minutes left. We might be able to get through like one or two more sections if you want to try.
Sure, yeah, we could do that. So this next section, issues and variance requirements, that could
So
be a
we're going to
very
skip the
important.
required development standards.
Yeah, we could do that because all that is that's kind of like a table of contents. So,
Oh,
someone
okay.
can jump to section 3.4 regarding sign requirements, or 3.5 if they want to look at, what the setback requirements are. Um, these documents, this type of document oftentimes will find its way to the architect that's assigned to the project, and they'll look at this document as a jumping off point for designing the project.
Okay,
So there's
cool.
all this objective development standard criteria further down the document. You'll notice that up in the first few pages is a lot of objective criteria, but more of an executive summary. Just like this issues and variance requirement section, this is where, I'll let clients know if there's an issue that I see potentially with what they're proposing. I'll look at what the code requires and have some tacit understanding of their business and what they're trying to accomplish. And if I see that there might be an issue, I'll disclose that to them here within this section,
Okay,
just to bring things to their attention. Hey, we be mindful of this. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but this is something you need to be mindful of.
awesome. All right. And we need to wrap this up. And so I do want to just have you tell everyone who's listening, whether it's live or after the fact, if someone has questions, when would you be someone that you would want them to contact you?
Where would be somewhere
When
I didn't
when
quite hear.
would when would you want someone to contact you if they have questions? I mean, some parameters of, hey, if you have some questions, if you meet this standard, then I'd love to talk to you, because you don't necessarily want to talk to someone who's in Florida about what's going on, but they should find someone local to talk to. But if someone's in
Yeah,
California, when should they maybe call you for just to ask you some questions and see if maybe if you can help them as a consultant?
sure. Um, if you have a project in Southern California, either LA County, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, uh, Arizona, Northern California, I'll go as far as the San Francisco area, Utah, feel free to give me a call. When you should call, if you've procured interest in a property and you're trying to attract a retailer and you're starting to have those discussions, that would be a good time to make that phone call or to reach out and say, hey, I'm talking to, this car wash retailer. I think we can do it. I've looked at the zoning. It appears that it's something that might be doable. What do you think? And I'd be happy to do a quick toe dip and share my thoughts with you. And if you decide to move forward, then we could do something more comprehensive before commitments are made.
Cool. And do you want to go ahead and give your phone number out, or should we just
Sure, yeah,
put
I'm happy
that?
to do that. Again, my name is Adan Madrid, and my phone number is 949-235-9538. That's 949-235-9538. And my email address is Adan, spelled A as in apple, D as in David, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, at 7, P as in planning, C as in construction, D as in development.com.
All right, cool. And we've been getting some really great comments here in the chat. People are really appreciative, and people are sending me private messages too. Thank you so much for doing that, Tabitha. And really some good feedback. So we really appreciate you coming today. And one last
Sure,
quick
my pleasure.
question is Jennifer is asking, as an agent who is just jumping into this, who files the documents? Is it the agent? Is it the client? Is it the consultant? Who's filing the documents with the city or the
Uh,
jurisdiction?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, it's either gonna be the retailer or it's gonna be the property owner slash developer. It all depends on how the lease agreements are written and where the divisions of responsibility lie. Um, Depending on the season, if it's a landlord's market, then I find that usually the burden of obtaining entitlements and the permitting falls on the retailer because it's a landlord's market. And the landlord's telling the retailer, hey, if you want to come here, here's the rent amount, here are the terms, and by the way, you got to go get your own entitlements. If it's not a landlord's market and it's a retailer's market, I see it flip the other direction where the landlords are offering to fully entitle the property as a way to attract the retailer. Um, so it's either the retailer getting their own entitlements, they'll hire a guy like me to do it for them, or the property owner slash developer is obtaining the entitlements.
Adan, this has been fantastic. I'm looking forward to our next session for those of you who are live on February 9th, same time, same bat channel, same bat station. But please watch your emails if you've registered for this event, because we will be doing a follow-up letting you know how to get the recording, because I got to go back and watch the recording because there's so much good information here. And I wasn't able to take notes because I'm hosting. I'm just really excited about learning this information. I'm really excited about the next one and what we're going to be learning there. So if you have questions, I know everyone's been paying rapt attention. So please reply to the email that we sent you and reply to the email, even if it's just to say, wow, that was great, really appreciate it, is helpful because the email systems, when we send email to you and you don't respond, sometimes they think they're spam. We want to make sure that we stay out of your spam box and that we're communicating. So Adan Madrid, great having you. I'm Chris Vogt.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate hosting this video and this session with you. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Have a great day,
Thank you,
everyone.
Chris. Appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.